that we have before us, I think we all know, unfortunately, the language right now that we have is not going to work. In fact, it would provide more opportunities for Kinder Morgan than the Attorney General says that they have right now. So I look forward to amending this bill as we move forward and simply making sure that this private company, a private petroleum company, cannot use eminent domain in South Carolina. So I think the language can be pretty short and sweet, but again, more than anything, I really appreciate you guys having this hearing here and allowing South Carolinians the ability to have a voice. Thank you.
Let me, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I think I heard you say that you think that this bill needs to be amended.
I do. So the current language that we have before us would actually allow for permissions and abilities that Kinder Morgan currently does not have. So when this bill was originally created and pushed forward, it was before the Attorney General came out with their decision and said that they do not believe that Kinder Morgan can use eminent domain in South Carolina. So the language in the bill is actually creating a framework, a permitting process for them to use eminent domain. And I think instead we just need to amend the language very simply just to say this is a private company and they're not allowed to use eminent domain.
You know, it's not going to be that simple because we already allowed some private companies, SCEG, co-ops, to do that, to get electricity to people for the good of everybody. So we may have to come up with some other language, but I don't think you can just say it that way.
Could we say just with petroleum though?
Well, that's something we got to look at because that's sort of what the Attorney General bases his opinion on. And I'll caution you too. He's not a judge. He's Attorney General, which means he, just like I have an opinion, he has one too. So it's not the force of law. A judge could decide differently than the Attorney General, and they often do. But I understand what you're saying, that we need to amend it, but I don't think it can't be that simply done. It may have to be tailored to petroleum.
I definitely agree with that, and I look forward to working with whoever would like to help come up with that language. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We own a 45-acre farm in Beach Island, and the proposed pipeline goes right through the heart of our farm. The farm was built in 1832, so it's 183 years old. It's about half pasture land, about half woods, and the pipeline would go through about 1,500 feet of our land. Do the math, 50 feet wide times 1,500 feet. It's about 2 acres. That's not a lot out of 45, but our concern is how Kinder Morgan will determine fair market value. Now, if they just paid me for the 2 acres of land out of 45, not costing a lot of money, my concern is I'm probably 5 or 10 years away from retiring, downsizing, and be interested in selling what I own. I've previously been approached by other investors who want my entire parcel for development, farms, what have you. So if the pipeline's out in the middle, that would severely impact our ability to be able to sell it for what should be a fair value 5 or 10 years down the road. So the main issue is determining fair market value and the negative impact of the pipeline. I've looked online, virgin land such as ours, that has no existing right-of-way. Studies have shown the property is devalued anywhere from 10 to 50%. So that's my concern, is down the road when I get ready to sell, Kinder Morgan's not going to be there. I'll have a one-time payment up front, but then in the domain, they can give me what they want. I have no recourse. Without them eminent domain, I either negotiate a price that I can live with, or I will walk and they find somewhere else to build a pipeline. So that's all I have to say is I do support the bill that would not allow them as a private, for-profit pipeline company to exercise the right of eminent domain in our state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your extraordinary efforts to help relieve South Carolina property owners of the threat of eminent domain as the South Carolina laws are now written. As a native of South Carolina and a current owner of 7 properties in South Carolina, I do live in Georgia, Augusta. I am especially interested in the powers municipalities and utilities have called eminent domain. One of our properties, the one my grandfather bought in 1911, and where I grew up, and my mother died just 6 years ago, has been divided into 7 different parcels because of the powers utilities and governments have of eminent domain. I would like to read an email my sister received from a Barry L. Brown, who owns land along Atomic Road, and who was planning to come tonight until he became ill. If he were here, he would stand and speak to the subject of Mr. John Kane. Quote, "My experience with Mr. Kane was 90% positive and respectful, but he was very reluctant to accept no as my final answer to his offer to cross my land. I can see where such persistence would be intimidating to people, old as well as young. In particular, Mr. Kane ended our conversation by advising me that I would be getting a call from the project manager or even a vice president of Kinder Morgan. After responding that they were welcome to call, but my answer would be the same, he said, Mr. Brown, this project is going to happen. This pipeline is going through. I find the final remarks by Mr. McCain particularly annoying in light of the Attorney General's opinion of what constitutes South Carolina law. Mr. Kane would have one believe that the right of eminent domain is there for Kinder Morgan's use, but clearly it is not the Attorney General's opinion. I was going to suggest that if the law were going to change the wording in the eminent domain laws, that it include words to this effect. No person representing a company without clear eminent domain powers shall call any property owner and insinuate to the contrary. This would relieve the property owner of the legal expense of determining whether or not such a company has powers. That is his recommendation to change the law. Rationale. Any person who believes a company has eminent domain rights is much more likely to convey consent, believing there's no alternative. I hope these ideas help. Thank you for what you're doing. Barry L. Brown. And that is the end of his note. Mr. Brown's comments echo a conversation I had with a gentleman from Kinder Morgan at the meeting held in this room earlier this year. I mentioned that Georgia's DOT had denied permission for the Palmetto pipeline to go through the state of Georgia. His response to me was, "Oh yes it will. You do not know how many tricks I have up my sleeve." To paraphrase a wise guy, kind words will get you far, but they are much more effective if you carry a gun. The threat of eminent domain has been Kinder Morgan's gun. Let's remove it.
I was so grateful to Senators Young, Massey, and Setzler for submitting Bill 868. At least it established a procedure, any procedure, for a petroleum pipeline company to have to follow to obtain the power of eminent domain. I felt that the battleground would be public convenience and necessity in Aiken County, and that we would prevail. However, after reading the Attorney General's opinion, I would like you to go further, much further. In Section 310, please eliminate any reference to petroleum pipelines being necessary. I would like the bill to clearly state that private, for-profit petroleum pipeline companies are not recognized as public utilities and are not entitled to the power of eminent domain. In Section 330, the following is a compilation of my own experience and my talking with other landowners. Kinder Morgan never goes in to talk with a landowner stating that they have any intention of using eminent domain. They go to great lengths to avoid answering questions related to whether they have the power of eminent domain or intend to seek that power. They say things like, our company does not like to use eminent domain, or they talk about benefits to the area or wanting to make the property owner happy. Finally, if all else fails, they might state that the pipeline is coming and implying that the landowner has no choice but to comply. Kinder Morgan would skip around that section of the law with great ease. They're too slick to ever say they intend to use eminent domain. You must clearly distinguish between pretending to have the power of eminent domain, having the power to use eminent domain, and the act of using eminent domain. Eminent domain is actually a legal action initiated only when the property owners say no, or my property is worth more. I have a master's degree in business. I am pro-business, and I applaud South Carolina for being so too. But if a private petroleum pipeline company sees a profit to be made in a proposed pipeline venture, then let them negotiate without intimidating landowners to come to, in parentheses, these are the words they use, mutually beneficial agreements. That's what other private companies do. That's what petroleum pipeline companies have to do in some states. Will it be more difficult for Kinder Morgan? Of course. Will it be more expensive? Possibly. Will they have to reroute in some instances? Probably. But Kinder Morgan is doing that now. It's part of the process for them. Then, if they feel that they will be successful in their negotiations without relying on the threat of eminent domain, let them follow the procedures for obtaining agency approval from the Public Service Commission and DHEC. Now I'm going to say to you, if anything that I have said tonight resonates with you, please let these gentlemen know.
John Pettigrew from Edgefield, and I appreciate y'all being here, appreciate the opportunity to speak. On a little piece of timberland out of Key Road in Edgefield County, the Trump pipeline runs through, and this proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline is proposed to run through that also. But just wanted to make a few points about eminent domain. You know, private property rights, I think, are one of our most fundamental rights as citizens of this country. And as long as we use our property in a lawful manner, I don't think, you know, the government or a private company ought to be able to come in and take it from us. So we have to be very, very careful when we are dealing with a subject that involves personal property rights. And I look at the pipeline here that we're discussing as very different from an electric utility such as SC&G or a water and sewer authority who currently have eminent domain, and they serve the citizens of our state, of a particular county or the particular area where they are seeking eminent domain. So they're seeking that eminent domain to serve those people with a service that they need, whether it be electricity or water and sewer. Now, the way I understand the Kinder Morgan pipeline, and tell me if I'm wrong, their proposal does not intend to serve anybody in South Carolina. We're just being passed through to go down to Jacksonville, Florida. Is that correct? Is that y'all's understanding?
That is, I think that's wrong.
And my understanding, and a lot of this was from media reports, was that this bill that y'all drafted, that we're talking about here, was going to clarify the law. And I thought it was going to not allow the eminent domain to be used by a pipeline company. But as I read the quick reading of the bill, it not only doesn't not allow it, it sets up a procedure to allow eminent domain for a company such as Kinder Morgan.
It would under certain circumstances, and it sets some very high hurdles that they would have to meet.
In reading it, it looks to me like, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Senator Massey, you my senator, you can speak up on this too. It looks to me like it sets up a procedure for the Public Service Commission to decide if it's going to be able to use eminent domain. Is that right?
That's one prong of what it does. It also sets up a prong for the DHEC to be involved, and it sets up for there to be public hearings
Right.
at every stage.
But I think the critical point is who makes the determination of whether Kinder Morgan can use eminent domain? And it's not y'all, and it's not the citizens, it's, as I read it, the Public Service Commission, and maybe they have to hear from DHEC and all that. So you're talking about a statewide commission that may be from Charleston or Greenville or whatever, and they're gonna be making a decision about whether this can come through our property over here in Edgefield and Aiken and wherever. Is that right? I mean,
Well,
y'all tell me.
Mr. Pettigrew, you were in the House of Representatives. at
Many
one
years
time.
ago.
He's a former member of the House, so you
Many
know
years
that we
ago.
have to draft legislation that applies on a statewide level.
Right.
And we can't
Now,
target.
I'm not suggesting you target one part of the state as legislation. What I'm saying is, why don't we make the legislation so it's much tougher or more hoops to have eminent domain, or just outright prohibit eminent domain for a private pipeline company that does not serve one citizen in South Carolina?
We think you raised some very good points. I want to just let the public know, this bill was filed the last week of the legislative session, the last possible couple days that we could have filed something in June before the session ended for the regular session. So we got it filed. We fully intended for there to be public input and to have this type of discourse with folks like everyone has testified tonight, including Mr. Pettigrew. And this is why we're having this type of hearing. And the Attorney General opinion came out after, about a month after this bill was filed. In fact, we requested the Attorney General's opinion while we were working on getting a bill drafted. But the Attorney General said they couldn't get us an opinion before we had to file a bill. So there are things raised in the Attorney General's opinion that we are going to have to take into consideration to draft amendments for this legislation. And there are things that citizens like Mr. Pettigrew are bringing up in a hearing like this, which will be things that we are going to have to consider as possible amendments as well. So these are the types of comments that we need to hear, and I applaud Mr. Pettigrew for doing it. Thank you.
Mr. Pettigrew, since you introduced yourself to me earlier and told me how we sort of know each other, let me pick on you a minute.
I'm sorry.
So I assume then too you would be against the Keystone Pipeline, which ships oil from Canada to the Gulf Coast for no purpose to America.
I wouldn't be against the Keystone Pipeline, it's the eminent domain that we're talking about.
Well, I mean, you understand that farmers in North Dakota and Nebraska, they feel similarly that you do. They don't want it there either.
I don't know how they feel out there.
I just want to point out that whatever we decide, Keystone Pipeline, we're going to have a pipeline. If we go down the road of pipelines, it's got to sort of apply evenly to everybody. I just want to make that point. I'm not saying that we ought to have pipelines, because quite frankly, I think if we spent more time on solar energy and other renewables, we can get away from some of the necessity for thinking that we need to burn oil for everything. But I'm thanking you for letting you stand there while I say this, but I know a lot of people who feel, I'm for the Keystone Pipeline, I'm for offshore drilling, until it's their property. And so I just ask you to think about that, because whatever is good for the farmer in Nebraska, they will argue is good for the farmer in South Carolina, is good for the beach lot owner in Georgetown. So how we deal with this bill has far more reaching ramifications than just Aiken and Edgefield, because there are people in South Carolina who feel strongly both ways, either that we should not drill for oil off the coast of South Carolina, or we should drill for oil off the coast of South Carolina. I recognize that we probably really don't have a dog in the Keystone fight because it's 1,000 miles away from us. But as it gets closer to home, we start to have dog in the fight. And so I just point that out to say that there are probably a lot of people who walked into this room tonight who, if we'd taken a vote and said, are you for the Keystone Pipeline? Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. Well, there are probably people in Nebraska who say that they're okay with the Kinder Morgan or whatever. KM Pipeline, okay?
That's it.
we've got to have a uniform set of rules. Either pipelines are utilities or they're not. Either the necessity of shipping oil through pipelines is a necessity or it's not. And so those are things that we have to deal with in a uniform manner. I tend to think that we don't need the pipelines, but I don't think you can say we don't need one here and we need one there.
Sound like you're saying they would need a federal law on eminent domain.
Well, that's why I was just.
I don't know if we want to turn this over to Washington DC now. But if I could, okay, you go ahead, I want to respond, I want to send this up to those points too, if I could.
Why don't you go ahead and do that, and then I'll point out something.
Okay, I was just going to say that I think there should be a high hurdle if we're going to have eminent domain. And I may very well negotiate with Ken Morgan and let him come across my property because it's out in the woods and the pipeline's already there. So, okay, so I am not against a pipeline, so to speak, but I think we need to protect private property rights and be very, very careful and have a high hurdle if you're going to allow the eminent domain in this particular case. And as I said earlier, and y'all didn't dispute me, was that this does not provide any benefit, any fuel, any gas to South Carolina. It just passes on through us. So I think there should be some benefit to the people of South Carolina to have to be shown in this situation.
Mr. Pettigrew, I don't think anybody on the panel would disagree. In fact, in section 58-7-320, subpart 3, in the definitions part, it says that necessary for a public purpose or public necessity, which are two things that have to be shown in order for the eminent domain to be available to be exercised by a private company. That's defined to mean for a use that is vital to the welfare of the people of this state, which will be achieved by the location of the pipeline within the boundaries of this state, after considering any environmental harm that the pipeline might cause. So we did put in this bill that they have to show that the purpose is vital to the welfare of the people of this state. And just running it through this state, going to another state, in my opinion, would not qualify.
But your opinion, my opinion on that really is not going to matter. It's going to be that Public Service Commission, right? It's going to decide if it's vital to the state. I would think you would have maybe a group from the area that's affected, because and statewide and the group that's affected, and the area that's affected. And again, I just think it should be a very, very high hurdle if we're going to allow eminent domain for a private for-profit company that is not going to serve anybody in South Carolina. And I think it's very, very different from SCNG or the Edgefield County Water and Sewer Authority. I think it's very different. And it should be a very different standard and a higher standard. Okay. Thank you.
My name is Elena Richards. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to point out one number we discussed earlier. Kinder Morgan has said that there are over 2,000 landowners affected by the entire pipeline. So if they have reached agreements with 85%, that still leaves 400 landowners that would have their land taken away. We're not talking about one or two. It would be 400. So I just wanted to point that out.
Is that number in South Carolina or all the way along the route?
Altogether is 2,000.
That's in 3 states?
Yes, sir.
And where are you from?
I'm from Georgia.
Whereabouts?
Augusta.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Yvonne Klein. I live in Jackson, South Carolina, between Jackson and Beach Island, and I echo the concerns that so many property owners have. We have about 100 acres that we heavily impacted. It divides our property lengthwise, the proposed area that we like to the pipeline. Some of the concerns I have are the tremendous amount of wetlands that they will be boring underneath for this pipeline. Some of the fault activity we've had in our area, and that's very concerning to me. Also with the aquifers that we have, I'm very concerned. If we do have a leak, how many of our drinking waters, agricultural watering, irrigation systems will be affected by such a leak? I would just like to say that we have the high tension power lines through our property that my father-in-law's, one of the relatives down the line had signed an eminent domain to have access to that property. This is proposed to go along that high tension power line. And the issues that we have with that is we have this huge cleared area in our forest. It's just like a giant scar, and they're proposing to cut another swath adjacent to that. It would just, what I feel will ruin land that we have worked very, very hard to buy back. We started with 17 acres, and my husband has worked blood, sweat, and tears to put 100 acres of that family land back together. So it's very distressing to us, and I really appreciate you guys coming out, listening to all these concerns, and listening to landowners who will be very heavily impacted. But one thing that I would like to ask you, so you guys have had a lot on your platter with some of the laws in South Carolina that are weak, with the water laws that we've worked with you on, with this eminent domain law. And I just want to know, or have you guys think, and I don't want an answer, but just what other laws in South Carolina need to be looked at to protect the citizens as people from other states come in and try and take advantage of the resources that we have here. It seems like that's something we need to talk about also under the forefront. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Queen.
This bill deals with this area right now. We don't know 10 years from now where the next pipeline is going to be or who the next group is going to be affected, and everybody's going to have to be treated equally. So what we do, whatever precedent we set with the pipeline for you is going to be the precedent for the rest of the state, whether it's offshore drilling or some pipeline coming down from New York or Florida. So we'll have to figure that out. But thank you for being here as part of this process. And we would encourage you, if you've got other thoughts, because sometimes after you leave, you think about things that you didn't say. You can meet with May here, and if you want to be notified of future meetings, she can put you on a list. If you have comments that you think you want to make later, she can tell you the address and the website to send it to. So don't feel like that if you didn't say something tonight, you can't say it later. You can always get in touch with us by contacting the staff, and they'll make sure that they put it in our folders before the next meeting.